Good afternoon, everybody. We are here for another episode of Dispatches from the Energy Transition. Technically speaking, this is our second one this month, as we had an in-person segment here in Central Oregon as part of the Great Transformation. We're back online, talking to you remotely. Episode 16, Emerging Opportunities as Electricity Prices Rise. Big topic. With the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and how that's going to impact our industry. Looking forward to diving into it today. My name is Robert W. Cross. I'm the principal of Outfit and Cross Consulting. I've been working with this guy over here, Lucas Miller, from Mayfield Renewables for several years. Lucas, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Robert. Really excited for this one. We've got a topical issue at hand to look at this month. So really excited about it.
Yeah, before we dive in, I think it's really interesting with the act and everything that's going on in the space. It's obvious to see the hurdles and the challenges that we're facing. Probably one of my biggest takeaways from the Great Transformation, and then there's a lot of opportunity too. I'm excited to dive into it with our subject matter expert guest today.
Yeah, and with that, let's introduce our guest today. So I'm going to start with Elisa Wood, founder and editor from Energy Changemakers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Elisa. I want to give the audience just a quick rundown of what Energy Changemakers is, what topics you guys are focused on, and a bit on your background.
Thanks so much, Lucas. It's great to be here today. Love this show. Robert and Lucas, you did such a great job with it. And I'm very happy to be here with Steve Pullins, who's one of my favorite energy innovators. I am the founder and editor of Energy Changemakers. As Lucas mentioned, we are a website that provides content and community for those who are working on the grid edge. Before doing this, I was the founder and a co-founder and editor of Microgrid Knowledge. And we sold that company a couple of years ago, hence the beginning of Energy Changemakers. I've been writing about energy for about 30 years now, starting with S&P Global. And I think that this is the most exciting time ever to be in this field.
Love it. What an intro. Thank you, Elisa. We've also got Steve Pullins with us today, a fellow Wisconsin alum, which I learned just a couple hours ago in prep for this. So I'd love to have fellow Badgers on the call whenever we can. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Can you give us a quick explanation of your role at ResSET and some of your background as it relates to distributed energy resources?
Sure. So at ResSET, we focus on helping commercial industrial customers explore on-site energy systems, often called microgrids, as an alternative to their traditional energy supply, really looking at a combination of objectives around cost stability, reliability, resilience, sustainability, and time to power, those primary objectives. I've been doing microgrids, designing and building and owning microgrids for 21 years, and I've been in the energy business for 50. So I by choice, I focus on behind the meter distributed energy.
Thank you both. Let's get right into it because we have a pretty comprehensive program to talk about. One of the things that was pretty interesting to me in our discussions leading up to this episode, the act, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it's involved, right? It's pretty complex. There's interpretation, there's perceived winners and losers, and then what I would like to call the law of unintended consequences. As we hop into this here, Steve, or Lisa, are there things that really stand out to you as opportunity? Let's first look at the opportunity side.
Sure. Yeah. So there's there's opportunity that's obvious and there's opportunity that is not so obvious, I think, in this bill. So the bill is tough on solar and renewables in general. In electric vehicles, those seem to be the three areas that really get hit very hard in this bill. But as we'll talk about a little later on, there are other technologies that can be used in microgrids that actually have this bill treats well. So I think we're going to see probably more microgrids, and I'll be curious to hear what Steve has to say about this, that are looking at these other technologies and ways to use them in order to make the project cost effective with solar and storage, with the absence of the incentives that solar and storage had until now. It's really phenomenal when you think about it historically. 3 years ago, we had this incredible bill. We got, a boost from the federal government that solar and storage had never had before. And then suddenly 3 years later, a reversal. So lots of dramatic change very quickly. But this industry has been around for a long time. It's been an underdog for most of its history. And what I've always found remarkable about it, and what I love, the reason I love to cover it is because the people who are working on the grid edge, that's where the innovators are. And so I think, and we'll get into this later, but I think what we're going to see is that some of the things that perhaps the bill crafters didn't mean to do, they did, that will actually help the microgrid, off-grid approaches move along more quickly.
Elisa, I just want to make a quick follow-up point and then switching to Steve. I think we're all pretty bullish on microgrids. I think another aspect that's somewhat overlooked, the US federal government's not everything, right? I mean, there's still opportunity on the state and county level. Curious from your vantage point on that. I know that you cover developments in the industry locally too.
Yeah, I think, again, this happens again historically when the federal government isn't giving support. There are states that do step up more, and they're typically the states that are already stepping up to some degree. I think, California, New York, Northeast, Texas. And I think that what we're going to see, though, is, and we're seeing it already, is that the advocates are really focusing on the states and putting pressure on the states to do more. So absolutely, that's the place to put our attention. And I think, as they often do, they'll help keep things going. But again, I don't think it's just government support. There's more going on here than that right now. There's bigger forces afoot that are going to be pushing this industry.
Yeah, for example, the cost increases, right? The electric bills are going up at on average about 4.5% per year, which is twice the inflation rate. And the OBBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, one of the things that OBBA has done is put a focus more on fossil energy, right? That's where it's all the fossil energy aspects that are being supported, and frankly, that's not an area that is centered in the U.S. That most of the technology is built outside the U.S. The cost there, we've seen a doubling in the cost of gas turbines and steam turbines over the last a little bit more than 2 years. So that would all suggest that the prices are going to go even higher under, or post One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that will also drive different economic outcomes for wind and solar and energy storage projects. So that's going to be more helpful even in the absence of federal government incentives, and it's also going to drive more and more commercial, industrial, and even residential and agency type, so munis and folks like that, into the arms of microgrid developers.
And part of the reason that the prices are going up is because we're seeing for the first time, what is it, since the 70s, we're seeing electric demand actually rising. So there's a need out there for the product. And as Steve pointed out, a lot of the conventional approaches are pretty expensive right now. And it's hard to get turbines. There's a backlog. Um, you see utilities looking for more power, you see data centers looking for more power, you see commercial industrial facilities that people seem to be forgetting about now, that it's not just data centers that need energy. And all of these entities also really need reliable energy. So again, these are macro forces that are really opening the way for microgrids and like technology.
Mhm. Well, speaking of technology, we could probably talk about some of the winners and losers that from the OBUBA perspective. Obviously, we see carbon capture systems, and a lot of people think about carbon capture as this big system that is out there that has to extract the carbon from different processes or the exhaust of power plants, fossil-based power plants, and then sink it in with pipes, move it over to a cavern, and then sink it down in the cavern. Well, that's certainly true, and those are those large scale amine based carbon capture processes are indeed large, and you got to be 250 megawatts to make it pencil, as a minimum size. But there are other systems. There are half a dozen pressure swing absorption systems in New York City in residential buildings that are capturing carbon off of the exhaust of gas boilers and other gas systems in these buildings. And and it's removes a little bit more than 95% of the CO2. So the rules, even though they were built in OBUBA, under 45Q, the IRS sections, to support or enhance the position of the fossil industry that's focused on carbon capture and direct air capture. The positive fallout from that is there are others who are doing carbon capture that are more akin to the kinds of things that we talk about in relationship to buildings and commercial industrial firms that are also winners in that same vein. Fuel cells and linear generators, which are both non-combustion sources, right? It's a chemical breakdown of a gas to strip off the hydrogen to use for power production. They are low emissions, and they were brought back into the realm of being considered a renewable resource. The IRA had taken them out as of the end of 2024. And so they've been brought back into the picture. So that's a positive that we see. Energy storage is left relatively untouched, except for the foreign, I forget, FOEC.
Foreign entity of concern, and that's actually, we got an audience
FEOC.
question
Okay.
from Jorge Gonzalez asking exactly that, Steve. So aren't energy storage benefits very restrictive to domestically produced batteries or components, is Jorge's question.
So the answer is maybe yes, maybe not that limited. Again, this is one of the things where we have to wait for the interpretation that comes out from the IRS around how much of what percentage of the components inside a energy storage system push it over into the realm of being okay. It classifies as a renewable, or it classifies as an ITC warranted technology, which I think is 40% content has to be domestic or non-FEOC, and it'll move up to a higher number, 45 or 52 or something like that. But we're going to have to see what the rules out of the IRS and the interpretations that come out of the IRS really say there. But it also most likely, I mean, we've seen there's energy storage technology that you can get out of Europe. There's energy storage technology that you can get out of the Middle East, right? These are not from countries that are not on the bad boy list. So I think we're going to see maybe a change of shape a little bit, but I think energy storage is going to be a continued survivor in the realm of fostering energy transition and clean energy.
And Steve, we were talking just before this, you were talking about how long it took the IRS to create those rules last time. I think it was a couple of years. Is that right? So we could be at the midterms by the time we get some of these decisions.
That's true. You know, and I don't know if the IRS has been gutted by this or that executive order. I don't know. But it did. It took out of the IRA. It took for the more sticky sections of the IRA to and the IRS rules to get published as interpretations. Here's how you need to look at this particular section of the IRA. It took 2 years, and the stickier, the longer. Right. So. I would suspect that we're going to see the same timeline under OBUBA and various sections, because there are some significant section changes associated with that. Continuing on the winners, nuclear is obviously a lot of push across the country around nuclear. So, but people need to realize that in a wholesale market place where electricity transacts for roughly $40 to $50 a megawatt hour, large scale nuclear sits at about $64 a megawatt hour. And the small modular reactors, the studies that have been done so far show it coming in at a price of about $130 a megawatt hour. So there's lots to be done from a nuclear perspective on the the regulatory side and things like that, but there's a ton of work that has to be done on the economic side for nuclear to be a viable solution or a growing solution in our generation mix.
Well, Steve, just to keep us moving here, are there any on the losers column that you want to highlight? I think maybe residential PV or BESS are ones that stick out to me, but from your end of things, what do you see as maybe the one or two biggest quote unquote losers of the bill as we understand it today?
Yeah, I think the biggest losers of the bill are utility scale wind and solar, right? Those have been particularly called out, not only in OBUBA, but also in even some post OBUBA, a couple new executive orders, still trying to tighten the screws a little bit. It's clear that those are targeted to be diminished. And so I think that's a big issue, but I don't think we're going to see I think in the short term, we're going to see some impacts on residential and commercial industrial wind and solar. But I believe, like Elisa was saying before, that the states are kind of picking up the mantle on certain things. And remember that, energy supply across the country is not homogeneous, right? There's values that certain technologies present better in certain parts of the country than others, and things like that. And the states are in tune with that, the federal government not necessarily. So I think we're going to see some reshaping and some initial angst right? And a few pity parties, but in general, I think that those things will recast themselves and do quite well.
I just wanted to say too that I think electric vehicles, that's an interesting one because I'm reading a lot of sort of mega studies that are saying, oh my God, bad, 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 bad. You know, it's the numbers are going to go way down without this $7,500 tax credit. But there are some analysts, Lauren McDonald is somebody I follow. He's an EV analyst, and he doesn't think that's going to be the case. There's going to be some pain for sure, but he really thinks there's going to be a shift in the market and that he expects the tax credit to eventually just hold less sway in the market. And he believes that the car manufacturers are going to step up and they're going to figure out ways to, make these cars more affordable. And that ultimately the decisions that people make are not going to be based on the tax credit, but on, I like this kind of EV and I want it. And I can afford this one. Just like any other car, right? So I'm not as pessimistic about that segment as I think a lot of people are.
But there's clearly to take the $4,000 away of tax credit for the used EV and the up to 7,500 for the new, that's an initial pain.
Mhm.
But if my auto manufacturer was making his market or sales projections based on having a tax credit around, probably need a new marketing exec.
And this is important to microgrids, right, Steve? Because I remember, back a few years ago, the EVs were kind of a tack on to the microgrid, like, oh, we have a few chargers. But now, like, even in your project, you've got quite a few chargers, if I remember correctly.
About 70.
Yeah. So they're really looking at the microgrids are really incorporating fleets now. So it's becoming more significant.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Steve, you bring up a good point. Maybe it's worth touching on as Lucas changes the slides. Manufacturers, project developers, cities, the transition to distributed energy resources, it's not something that happens in a year, right? Like, policy has an impact, but when you think about macro forces from my vantage point, they seem to be far greater at this point.
Yes. And, and we've seen in 3 or 4 states just this year, we've seen some new acts that have at the states level that have encouraged more microgrid development. When I started 21 years ago, everybody laughed about that. So there's movement out there, and it's recognizing a need on the customer side of the meter. And
Right,
I think it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, or we just saw it in your neck of the woods, Lucas. You're in Oregon, right? Aren't you in Oregon?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, so we just saw recently a microgrid bill get passed there that they're describing as the first real policy microgrid bill in the sense that it actually creates a pathway for microgrid development. We've seen a lot of, not a lot, but we've seen several states that have passed incentive programs for microgrids, but this one is actually looking at what it takes to develop a microgrid. So a big important change.
So I do want to highlight a few macro trends and some projections looking out over the next few years. I just added a link to our source here to the chat as well. We pulled a few pieces of data from a Princeton University Zero Lab repeat project presentation that was from this month on the OBBA, with a couple key stats and figures to focus on here, really all of them around projected rising energy costs at the same time as we have projected constrained electricity supply growth. So like Elisa mentioned, we're anticipating maybe the first period of rapid electricity demand growth in the US since the 70s, driven by a mix of electrification and data center and AI growth. And at the same time, we're projecting increased costs and perhaps some reduced grid stability as well. So very challenging, very fast moving landscape. But Elisa, I'd turn it to you to give us kind of your sense of some of these macro or longer tail impacts of the bill, and anything that you're focused on as it relates to renewables development?
Yeah, so this study is interesting. This is by Jesse Jenkins. Many of you probably know who Jesse Jenkins is. He's kind of the industry's data wonk. He's always crunching the numbers on what's ahead, and he was really carefully watching this bill and creating numbers along the way and what it would do. And this was finally on July 4th when it was signed into law, what he sees coming as a result. So pretty tough stuff here. I mean, look at the expenditure for households and how much it goes up, and the reduction in capital and investments is terrible. And then of course the carbon issue. So if we take the bill and assume that it reduces use of clean energy, these innovations we're talking about do not occur. This is what we're left with, and it's not good. If you're interested in more about this, I would suggest there's a podcast out now. Ezra Klein interviewed Jesse Jenkins and Jane Flegel, who used to work for the Biden administration, climate policy. And the title of the podcast is Decarbonization Dead? The answer is no, but it's changed. But they go deeply into these issues and the costs here, and what this all means. We're being somewhat optimistic because we believe in innovation, and we believe that there are alternatives to the way things were being developed with the tax incentives, but you can't deny that it makes things harder to lose these incentives, and there's going to be short-term pain. I mean, I think the belief is that the next 6 months until the end of this year, we'll see like a lot of rooftop solar going in quickly before losing the incentives, and then a cliff. So I don't want to sound too Pollyanna here. Like I do believe long term this industry is going to do well, because as we said several times here, the macroeconomics are in its favor. But yeah, there's going to be some short-term pain, and this is what happens if these numbers are what happens if we don't overcome that.
It's a good point, Lisa. I do think too, and I'm curious from Steve's perspective. We talked about necessity being the mother of all invention. I'm kind of seeing it from my contacts and clients. As an example, with residential, the tax credit kind of going away, we're seeing a very clear pivot from EPCs and project developers. I think there's going to be a lot of growth in C&I in the next couple of years, but just curious, outside of the cliff, where is the pivot to opportunity for you?
I actually don't think, from what we've seen out of the IRA or OBUBA, I don't see them as pivots or pivot opportunities. I think if we look at the underlying things that have been taking place, so let's look at energy supply in the US over the last 10 years. Wholesale prices have been flat. Growth has been about 1% per year. All right, so this is well before IRA, well before OBBBA. Okay, and what we've seen is retail prices have grown a lot, okay, since the pandemic. So retail prices of electricity, they were, before the pandemic, they were going up about between 2 and 3% per year, and now they're going up 4.5% per year. Okay, that's at the retail rate. So if the retail rate is growing rapidly, twice the inflation rate, but the wholesale electricity rates are fairly flat and have been for the last 10 years, then, in the $35 to $50 range, a megawatt hour, then what that says is there's an increasing price in how the energy gets from the power plant to the meter on the side of the house. Okay. And that's not how that has nothing to do with whether that electron came from wind, solar, coal, nuclear, or gas. Okay. So take that one thing, and then look at the trend in reliability, which has been dropping steadily over the last 15 years in our traditional energy system. And then you look at the growth, the exponential growth of the damaging storms that are across the country. You know, what you end up with are a lot of reasons that commercial industrial firms are looking at and have been looking at over the last 5 years as to why they need to do something that hedges against their traditional energy supply. So I think that is the macro that sits underneath all of the policy ups and downs that are that are really driving the industry. Certainly, this is what I see driving commercial industrial firms moving to more and more on-site energy systems.
And is that accentuated, Steve, by the data centers coming into play so much now? I mean, they are also really demanding reliable power, right? And some would say they're threatening reliable power if they end up, you know, taking a lot of the power from the grid. So I'm curious what you're thinking about how to get into that.
So I'm a little bit of a contrarian on the AI and data center hype, and I've worked with many data centers, and I'm not convinced that we'll see a super large growth happening rapidly. A couple reasons. If you take a look at, you know, the electricity system in the United States growing about 1% per year, if you take all of the numbers that, or an average of the numbers that people are talking about, you know, about the AI growth, AI-based data center growth, it would take it to about 2% per year growth rate. Okay. I think that's well within our system's capabilities to expand and grow to handle a 2% growth rate over a 1% growth rate. Now, here's the other thing, two other facts to consider. Over the last 10 years, we've seen in compute power, we've seen a 5,000% increase in compute power, but only 100% increase in the power required by data centers. Okay, so there's a huge multiple there. Then the other thing is chip manufacturers are constantly improving the energy efficiency of their chips. TSMC showed a 20-year trend where they're tripling the energy efficiency every 2 years. Okay, that data is out there. So both of those factors suggest that that maybe as we grow the data center industry, which it will grow and it will add load, okay, it may be more of a manageable process than what we hear too much of in the pundit speak.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of hype about how much it's going to be growing.
Yeah.
Do you think, I'm curious, you said that you think our system can handle the 2% growth rate. When you say our system, do you mean our utility grid system, or do you mean our utility grid system plus on-site distributed energy?
Yes, I mean the total energy system, not just the utilities portion of it. Okay.
Great, as it seems like, I mean, we're hearing more and more about data centers that are starting to look at DERs. I know that their default tends to be the utility grid, but there's so much concern about interconnection and how quickly they can, you know, get on the grid, that there is a bit of a pivot in that they're looking more at DERs and on-site energy. There's even some business models around off-grid for data centers.
Yeah, those looks are happening. Whether they materialize, or the data center developers and owners just decide, well, I can wait out the utilities 7 years. You know, things like that. So we'll see. We'll see how that
But
unfolds.
it's great that you brought up C&I, because I think that gets lost in this whole conversation now. Everybody's talking data centers, data centers, data centers, and we're forgetting that we're also seeing a bit of a manufacturing ramp up, and
Yes, we are.
the really clear way of determining the cost effectiveness of reliabilities for manufacturers, making, again, the microgrid space good for many of us.
The other reason I say that the system can handle a 2% growth rate over a 1% growth rate is because take a look at the asset utilization at the generation and transmission level. It's 39%. You can look at the EIA data and suss out the numbers just like I have, and the distribution system's 34.5% asset utilization. So there's internal capacity. If we did a better job of managing our grids, we could suck up some of this growth just within existing assets.
So you've mentioned a lot of incentives to both boost the stability of our existing grid, but perhaps even rely less on it than you do now, and look at alternate ways to provide on-site power, whether that's fully developing an off-grid system, a microgrid system capable of interplay with the broader grid, or some of these alternate utility structures, which I definitely want to spend a few minutes on. But maybe let's start here with these first two buckets of off-grid development, microgrid development. Elisa, are there any kind of broad trends that you're seeing, or any particular regions or local projects that have really excited you over the last few months?
Yeah, well, more than the last few months. I mean, going back 5 years, I started seeing the term off-grid. I mean, it used to be just those folks that are off in a mountain or off on an island somewhere, and now suddenly we were starting to see the occasional off-grid project in a city. I mean, it was just such an anomaly. We were talking earlier about the JFK project, the JFK Hotel.
Yeah, TWA Hotel.
TWA Hotel, that's it, not JFK. Sorry, JFK is another
It's
very good
JFK.
microgrid that Steve was involved with.
Yeah,
totally different.
Yeah, the TWA Hotel is at JFK. Yes.
Okay, that's why I had the names confused. So TWA was a hotel that I don't know if my dates are right, but it was probably around 5 years ago, in New York City, decided to go off grid, and that was for price reasons, because it was so costly. We started seeing in California, again, high cost of electricity. We started seeing like wineries couldn't get interconnected, decided instead of connecting to the grid right away, just doing a microgrid or doing on-site power, and maybe later connecting to the grid when they could. Like the one company I talked to wasn't really sure. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But there was that option there, and we saw that start to grow. Recently, I was at a conference, Intersolar, when was that? In the spring. And there was a group talking there. It was Andy Krause from Northern Pacific Power Systems, and UC San Diego Design Lab. And they did a study on something they called agile electrification. And they were proposing these systems that were solar plus storage, with a focus on electrification, so also heat pumps. And they said in their study that in California, they found that what they called 65% grid defection produced optimal savings for homeowners. This was a homeowner play. So not totally off-grid, but partially off-grid was what they were advocating for. I don't know if their numbers still hold without the tax incentives. I'm going to talk to them about that and find out, but it's an interesting model. And, I think we're going to see more of this kind of model. We're hearing more and more about virtual power plants now. Since this bill passed, people are saying, well, demand response, the demand side, we're going to focus on the demand side. There's definitely a lot there. So, yeah, so I think in terms of off-grid development, I think it's a trend that is starting to happen slowly. We also saw a company that was in New Jersey that tried to do off-grid homeowner microgrids, and just couldn't pull it off, and they ended up going out of business. So as these things often are, when something's new, you see it bubble up, you see it go back, you see it bubble up some more. And I think that's where we are. We're kind of in a bubble up phase. But these trends are going to, high prices and lack of reliability, inability to interconnect, they're all going to drive more off-grid development. So we'll be getting into later on. Steve's going to be talking about a really fascinating project he's done that's all off-grid. And that's just, to me, and he's doing more of them. So these are real indicators that this is something we have to watch. This is fascinating. And then microgrid development, that's been a steady growth for quite a while now. Steve actually developed one of the first CNI microgrids, right? Am I remembering that correctly, Steve?
I developed the first community microgrid and the first
Community
utility microgrid
There you go. Yeah, there we go.
in San Diego. Yeah.
Yep.
San
Yep.
Diego County.
Yeah.
Bring up another audience note here from Jeff Beeman in the California Bay area, and I've seen this quite a bit. He installed 2 off-grid residential microgrids in San Francisco because the utility PG&E can't bring new electrical service to new construction duplexes. 3 years and still waiting on county. But I think to an extent, necessity is the mother of all invention, and I think innovation is going to happen to some degree, no matter what's going on right now.
Agreed.
We do have
The
one
segue-
example I'd
Go
love
ahead.
for us to chat about, the Ann Arbor Sustainable Energy Utility Model, as well as a Cuyahoga, Ohio, alternate utility model. So now thinking this third bucket here, maybe we'll start with you, Elisa, on the Cuyahoga side, and then turn it to you, Steve, on the Ann Arbor side. But just these really unique and novel structures that are kind of a mix of microgrid and a local level utility that we're really just getting started with. So maybe Elisa, if we can start with you on Cuyahoga and then turn to Steve and Ann Arbor.
Cuyahoga's fascinating. It's another one that's been around for about 5 years now. This is none of these are rarely new once you start to see them like come to the fore with some development or some approvals, because as you all know, these kind of projects take a long time often to get off the ground, especially one that involves government like this one does. So basically the gist of it is that this county was doing economic development. It was losing its manufacturing. It wanted to bring it back, and it felt like what it needed to do was get away from its utility, get its prices down. It needed microgrids. It was concerned that its utility would block its attempts to do microgrids. So it decided to take a very radical approach and create its own utility. So county utility, which is dedicated to building microgrids, predominantly for C&I, although they're talking about maybe eventually moving into residential too, but right now it's C&I. They just recently had a big win. They got funding for their first manufacturing microgrid. They truly want this to be a model that others can take from throughout the country. And they're gearing up to sort of do a lot of education about this model and help others who want to do the same thing. So it's kind of a wake up call, I think, for utilities too, that hey, if you're gonna stand in the way of these microgrids, we might find an alternative path to get them built. So beware. And then Steve can talk a little bit about what's happening in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which also is really interesting. They had a referendum vote back in November to create what they're calling a sustainability energy utility. I call it a distributed energy utility. It's a way of bringing more distributed energy into the system. But Steve, who is doing a lot of work in Ann Arbor, can provide more information about that.
Yeah. That in Ann Arbor, being a college town, and as you might suspect, in trying to get in tune with its sustainability side, that what they were seeing is that the incumbent utility there, carbon footprint is twice the national average, and not really making great strides for reducing that. So they felt the city felt like it needed to augment processes where they could reduce the carbon footprint within the city, not dependent upon the utility. So this sustainable energy utility is really geared to come alongside the utility as as a provider and deliverer of energy, and then add generation and add methodologies that actually reduce the electricity usage. So it's the SEU in Ann Arbor is really focused on two main things: geothermal, because it's a cold climate, and the idea of using geothermal to help with heating and cooling, and reduce the use of boilers, of gas boilers and other forms of gas heating, and then also rooftop solar. So the idea is wherever you're doing the geothermal, do the rooftop solar and augment and use that electricity to power pumps and things like that, as well as other facilities, other electric needs on the residents. And the idea is, and they got approval, and this is where the referendum came in, or was the state law actually, enabled them to, they can sell that power back to the grid. So, and use it from one residence to another, from one neighborhood to another. And although it's kind of limited to Ann Arbor, you could see where it wouldn't be too far down the road where you could have Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti transacting electricity that's been produced on rooftop solar at total wise in a neighborhood. So it's just beginning, and there's a on the south side of Ann Arbor, there's a whole community that's kind of like this is their serial #1 project. And I will tell you, the project I'm going to talk about, Southtown, we fully intend to hook into another SEU project that's going to be in the neighborhood where Southtown is.
And Steve, on the Ann Arbor, so if you're in the city, you can get those solar panels free of charge through this utility. Is that how it works?
That I'm not sure. I think it's no upfront capital, but I wouldn't say free of charge.
Yeah,
I would
okay.
say no upfront capital.
Yeah, that makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Because the investment's got to be paid back.
Right. So it's sort of like, it's almost like they're playing the role of the developer, right? The city. They're providing
Yes.
and maintaining the solar panels on the rooftops, and then they're selling the energy to make back the investment.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the only thing that they're not taking on board, which is the electric grid infrastructure, right? Because that's been a very, we've seen it time and time again in the United States. It's very hard to municipalize a utility with electrical infrastructure.
Right. It's a way of doing a municipal utility without going through that step that blocks it all the time of taking ownership of the distribution grid.
Correct. And
Yeah.
so in many ways, the SEU in Ann Arbor has many of the features of a community choice aggregation entity, like in California, New York, Ohio, other places.
Mhm.
So it is similar to a CCA.
Steve, why don't you walk us through this project,
Sure.
how it came to be, and the innovation that's happening here?
Yeah. So this is called Southtown. So it's a 250,000 square foot vertical residential. It's mass timber. It sits right across the street from the University of Michigan. This is towards the southern part of downtown of Ann Arbor, and it's off grid. So we have many on-site energy resources to make sure we're providing the affordability, the reliability, the resilience in the face of major winter storms. And this is going to be a net negative carbon footprint. This building will be. Okay. So why do we go off grid? Well, as we were running the the economic models early on, when we had a grid connection planned, we kept finding that as the utilities rates increased, we kept using the utility electricity less and less and less. So we got to the point where we were only using 4% of the consumption was coming from utility sources. And that was when we were looking at the utility rates going up at 3.5 to 4.5%. Well, the local utility went up 10% last year, and they filed for another 10% increase in 2025. So, and that's going to get approved too. So it was just too much risk long-term for the residents and for the building owner. So, and then with the utility being twice the national average on carbon footprint, it was not, it didn't align with our sustainability objectives. This utility has left Ann Arbor in the dark several times over the last few years, and typically there's been at least one 3 to 4 day outage when it's really, really cold out per year. And that has left a lot of negative feelings between the city of Ann Arbor and anybody who lives there and the utility. So it was just pretty clear to the customer, to the builder of this facility, the real estate firm, that they're having a grid connection was not going to feed our affordability objectives, our reliability objectives, our sustainability objectives. So it didn't make a lot of sense to add that cost to the facility. So that's why off-grid. So if we can go to the next, I'll explain a little bit about what the system is there for this. So there's it's 8 stories. It's 313 apartments. There's commercial space on the first floor and some other services and things like that. There's a garage on the inside on the first 2 floors where there are 70 spaces, and all are EV enabled. So there's chargers for every space. And there's 2 large bike rooms. So these bike rooms are fire rated, and the expectation is that they're, if not in the beginning, but certainly over time, will become more and more electric bikes and scooters and that. And because that has been a problem in places like New York City, battery fires, in micro transportation, couple requirements here in Southtown. You can't keep a battery in your apartment. You got a e-bike battery or scooter battery. They need to be in the bike room, and we have secure storage for that in the bike rooms. And they all the bike batteries, e-bike batteries, and that need to be UL listed, because that's a root cause of some of the fires in New York City in the micro transportation area. So this microgrid is made up of 3 fuel cells and a carbon capture system on the back of the fuel cells. So the fuel cells take natural gas into a front end device that separates the oxygen, nitrogen, CO2, and hydrogen. Passes the hydrogen into the fuel cell active region to chemically convert to electricity. It returns the nitrogen and the oxygen to the air, and the carbon capture system captures the CO2 and purifies it and liquefies it. So the output is a liquid food grade CO2. And we have a truck that comes every 3 days to pick it up. Okay, and we sell it to the wholesale marketplace, because liquid food grade CO2 is a very expensive commodity. Okay, we have 2 batteries, and we have 2 small solar arrays. So when you look at the fuel cells, these are three 460 kW. The batteries are two 500 kW by 1.1 megawatt each. And the solar is 137 kW. So it's very small solar because it's a vertical building. We have very little roof space. Okay. So the essence here is it's multiple assets. It's tied to the main distribution panel for the site. And it's also supplying auxiliaries across all of our heating and cooling systems. So auxiliary power, and the waste heat from the fuel cells does a couple things. It supports our heating and cooling loop, and it supports domestic hot water. And it can be through the heating and cooling loop, it can be used to help recharge the geothermal field. We have 84 wells underneath the site, and it can help recharge that in times where the geothermal field has been heavily used, or after it's been heavily used. We can use it to help recharge the field so that it can be back to 100% usage. So that's, and the absorption chillers tied to the back end of the fuel cells allow us to create cooling. So it's a adjunct amount of cooling to the geothermal. Okay.
Steve, we're just at a couple minutes left here, and I do want to move us on to this last one and give you maybe a 90-second explainer on what really surprised me was the small footprint of all of this equipment. So you just walked through fuel cells, absorption chillers, carbon capture, all of this fit in a seemingly tiny footprint in this urban environment. So anything you'd have to add to that?
Sure.
And again, in about 90 seconds to keep us on time.
So the microgrid footprint is about 5,000 square feet outside and about 4,000 feet inside for a 247,000 square foot building. So it's a small portion. So you need to one of the important things to recognize when you're looking at on-site energy systems is yet you can kind of stick them in corners just about anywhere. That doesn't require a huge amount of property or space, and frankly, that 9,000 square feet, the microgrid has to pay to use that space, right? It leases that space from the building, and so therefore it has to carry its own weight, so to speak.
We're wrapping up on time. Steve, thanks for giving us information on the project. We'll kind of send out more details to the attendees after the episode. It was a pretty meaty discussion here. Key takeaways, and I think the group is pretty much aligned with these, so to speak. Necessity is the mother of all invention. The bill is ripe for unintended consequences that will be beneficial to renewables. And we've all been on this ride. Everybody on this call is an industry veteran, some longer than others, but we tend to be a resilient group, and we're going to innovate our way through these challenges and continue to find growth. We do have a minute or so here. Any comments in regard to the takeaways? Elisa, your perspective? I mean, I
just wanted to give my last minute, if I can, to point out one more thing that I hear Steve say a lot. He says that the grid is just one resource. And I think that's the key here to these changes, that it's not the grid or off grid or this or that. The grid is just one of those many resources.
And contact information here for both Elisa and Steve. Solar Builder's also a partner and a supporter of Dispatches. Shout out to Chris and the team over at Solar Builder. And our next episode will be an interesting topic as well. What the hell? A couple of industry veterans, Jenya Medbray, Chief Commercial Officer of Nevados, and Nadine Hop, The Chief Technology Officer, Pauline, will be talking domestic content. We'll be talking about how to mitigate risk and project design. And I think the insurance might even pop up. So thanks everybody for tuning in to Dispatches. Look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everyone.